Good evening, everyone. Welcome to, I believe, our 15th Fall Task Force meeting. Thank you all for being here, spending 15 two-hour evenings with us. We really appreciate it. I'm gonna kick things off again tonight, and then Emma will be, we have some guest presenters, then Emma will be facilitating at the end. So you'll hear a bit from each of us. And the task force meetings, as usual, will be recorded, and those who are unable to attend tonight will be able to access them after the fact. We'll be putting them on our website as usual. And so moving forward, as usual, we will do a little Zoom orientation. And for task force members, please remember to mute when you're not speaking. Hold questions and comments for designated task force, for designated discussion times. Raise your virtual hand. And again, I think in the last month or two, they switched the virtual hand on us, and it's over in the reactions area now. It may also be in participants, but I know I'm able to find it more easily in the reactions at the bottom of the screen. And so do that when you're interested in speaking. And for audience members, we ask that you mute yourself and turn your video off except during public comment periods. So thankfully, or hopefully we're all pretty used to this, but the monthly reminder as well. And as usual, we'll try to keep the chat reasonably open for technical questions. So if you do have an issue and you're not able to raise your hand or something, put it in the chat and we'll have folks monitoring that as usual. Moving on. So tonight's agenda, again, we're doing welcoming and housekeeping right now. And then we'll be moving on to public comment. We actually, I think, need to still get the meeting summary out to you all. We realized that in the flurry of things, we did not do that. So next month, we'll ask you to look at both meeting summaries, both last month and this month. So we're skipping over that because we didn't get it to you. So we can't ask you if you think it looks okay. But then we'll be moving on to public comments. And then we're going to spend the bulk of our discussion time together talking about complementary strategies, sort of strategies that are complementary to different pricing strategies that we've talked about. And again, we actually have 3 guest presenters tonight that you'll be hearing from. And then we're also going to spend a good amount of time in small groups where you can sort of discuss what you've heard. We have hopefully a fun sort of theoretical reinvestment strategy exercise for you all to do and to help with discussion. So that's the bulk of tonight's meeting. And then at the very end, we're going to talk a little bit about the draft recommendations. We are almost near the end of our process, and Emma will be sort of walking through how we're going to get through and hopefully come out at the end with some draft recommendations that you all feel good about and sort of have a great product out of this time together. So that's the meeting plan. So public comment. I do not believe that we received any written public comments through to our email box this morning or this month. And it does look, I think I just saw someone's hand go up.
I think we had Doug Allen's hand up, but now it's back up again. So I think Doug is our public comment tonight, or our first one.
All right. If you would like to go ahead, Doug, we'd love to hear from you.
Thanks again for giving me the opportunity to speak before your committee here. In case you haven't heard, HB 3065 is back before the Oregon Legislature's Joint Committee on Transportation tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. with a new amendment labeled -8. This was only posted on the legislature's website on Saturday, so I had no time to submit written material to you. While it's somewhat improved over the -5 amendment, this bill still has the same message: borrow money, expand freeways, and charge high tolls to pay off the bonds. Please encourage the City of Portland to continue its opposition to this bill. You may submit your own comments and testimony until 8 a.m. Wednesday via the Oregon Legislative Information System regarding HB 3065-8 amendment. Thank you very much for your time.
All right, thank you very much, Doug. And are there any other public comments? Anyone else tonight? I'll pause for a minute.
I'm not seeing any other hands pop up, Shoshana.
All right, we can move along then. Should move to the next slide. Are we trying? There we go. So just How looks like How has her hand raised. How, did you have a question?
Sorry. Yeah, I couldn't raise my hand quick enough. Is there any way Doug can share a link to that site to testify or just for written testimony? I think that would be helpful.
And if not, we can send that out. I don't know if oh, there we go. We got it. Monique shared it. Yeah, there's a hearing tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. And so there's the link. And actually that feeds right into project updates. We're gonna share that as well. As Doug mentioned, it is, I think there is more expansive language in there about use of revenues for things like what we've been hearing from the committee to advocate for around multimodal investments, around thinking about diversion and safety, sort of both on and off the interstates. So it so far in our analysis, it feels like it is a step in the right direction, not the full system that I don't think that it as implemented would be the toll program that this committee has talked about, but it does the -8 feels, I think from the analysis that we've done, like it is a step in a better direction and leaves more room to continue working with the region. But I encourage everyone to take a look and we'll continue to share information about it. I do think that Commissioner Hardesty may be testifying again in the morning as well and sharing sort of a step in the right direction and more work to do. So that is one of the updates that we wanted to share. And then I think the main other one was just to encourage you all again, if you hadn't had a chance, the Metro Regional Congestion Pricing expert panel that took place a couple of weeks ago, we mentioned it at the last meeting, and I believe we sent out a link to the recording. But if you didn't have a chance, just one more plug. It was 2.5 hours, so it takes a little while to watch. Although the first part was sort of a overview, like we gave to this committee of their study findings. You could maybe fast forward through that. But then the sort of the expert panel discussion that they had was just a really thoughtful discussion on how pricing can be used and sort of hearing about what's going on in other places. So it was an interesting presentation. If you haven't had a chance, and if you want to spend a couple more hours thinking about pricing, we encourage you to do that. And then, lastly, we'll be talking about this, but we're almost done. This is our third to last meeting. So just again, a huge hearty thank you to all of you for being here with us for so long, and sort of thanks in advance for helping us do still some hard work. We just have a couple more meetings, but some hard work to really wrap up and try to get something really meaningful out of this. So thank you for your work. Thank you in advance. And those are really the main project updates right now. So again, tonight we're going to spend most of our meeting talking about complementary strategies. And when we say complementary, we have been talking about strategies sort of complementary to pricing in particular that will help to achieve a more equitable system, a system that is better from climate, mobility, equity standpoints. I think moving on. We've showed this slide at least once before, I think a few times before. And again, pricing is really just one tool in the toolbox. As the many different sort of cogs in this wheel show, going from the sort of the right clockwise around, we also need to continue to work on right-of-way allocation, or put more simply, how we allocate and use our street space. We also need to continue to build safe and accessible infrastructure and make sure people have access to it. We need to continue to make sure that there are mobility services and options ranging from transit to bike share to other ways for people to get around. And we need to continue to do all sorts of incentives, and programming, make sure that people know that they have different options, everything ranging from safe routes to school programming to Sunday parkways and things like that. And then offer incentives so that people can really access these and whether it's discounts or things like that. And then the last cog is this pricing and reinvestment tool. And the whole reason we started this conversation is because we think there is more to explore with pricing, and we may want to sort of turn up the dial on that particular strategy. But again, not by itself. We need to continue thinking about these all together. And in many ways we do. PBA at the city, we're all sort of much of our work, all our work essentially, I think fits in all of these areas. We're constantly trying to do these. But again, know that we may, we are exploring pricing a little bit more significantly. And then if so, it will be, if we turn up the pricing dial, we make it a little bit more expensive to drive, it will be just that much more important that people have really good other options. We've talked a ton about this from with all of you. But, and then the unique thing about pricing is that not only does the price signal itself send a signal and help to encourage different behavior, but it does actually raise revenue. And this is sort of a delicate point, as we've talked a fair amount about. We started this conversation thinking about how can pricing itself be the policy tool that we want to achieve climate and equity outcomes, not just to raise money. We're not having a conversation just about charging more and raising money, but it does raise money. And how can that money and reinvestment help to also achieve some of these other things? And so that's some of the conversation we're going to talk about tonight. And as we sort of delve into that, I think moving on to the next one. We did want to also just really briefly revisit this slide, which I believe way back in the 5th meeting, which was probably a year ago or something. It's hard to, yeah, it might actually have been exactly a year ago, because I think that the 3rd meeting was in March, so April, May. But we did, again, we're not having a conversation just about pricing for raising revenue, but it does feel like a little bit of important context as we talk about the revenue and the potential for reinvestment, that, revenues are decreasing. Transportation revenues sort of across the board are decreasing. Sorry, someone is telling me that my kid didn't go to online school at PPS. the daily PPS reminder, sorry. They actually did, they didn't get marked. Sorry. So transportation funding has been declining. It's been declining for years. Funding streams are declining because they haven't been keeping up with inflation. They're declining as vehicles get more and more fuel efficient, which we want, a good policy goal from a climate perspective, but hard on our revenues. And at the same time, there are more and more demands being placed on our right of way. These come from many different reasons, whether it's increased population in the metro region, whether it's sort of new types of shared micro-mobility, whether it's new things like TNCs or the increasing urban delivery that we've talked about. But so we have a sort of an unfortunate revenues going down, demand for our space, and sort of needs on our space going up. And so that's the context in which we're sort of talking about the potential for new revenue and what we can do with it. And I think, but so just sort of quickly sharing that context, moving back to complementary strategies again. The complementary strategies that we've sort of heard through our 15 months together are listed on this slide. And this is by no means meant to be everything that we could be doing or that we should be doing or even that we are doing as an agency and as a city to create the transportation system that we want. There are many things that we need to be doing to create the safe, the equitable, the climate friendly, and easily mobile transportation system that we want. But we did feel like these areas are many of the things that have come up and that we've heard from you, that we've touched on in different presentations. And so this is sort of our starting point for our conversation tonight. And again, these hopefully won't be surprising to you, but we've heard from you all. We've talked a lot about the importance of transit, whether that's transit infrastructure, transit service, transit operations. We've talked a lot about the importance also of biking and walking infrastructure. We've talked about the importance of trip discounts and different types of financial incentives so people can actually access services, the importance of electrification, especially in meeting our climate goals, and whether that's infrastructure for electrification, or whether that's rebates for people, again, to access different EVs. And we've talked about the importance of affordable housing and things like transportation or transit-oriented development. So, and again, there's more that we should be doing as a city, but these are many of the areas that we feel like we've heard the most so far. And so to help sort of delve a little bit deeper into some of those, and again, not even quite all of those, but to set the stage basically for a deeper conversation about complementary strategies and about the strategies that are most important to you. We have 3 presenters tonight, and we're going to hear from each of them pretty quick, sort of short high-level summaries. And so again, we know we often do this. We share a fair amount of dense information, but hopefully it gives you some additional things to think about. And then again, we're hoping to give you plenty of time to sort of process what you've heard and discussion. And we even have an exercise that hopefully should prompt sort of a really good discussion about what do you think are some of the most important strategies. So we'll hear from Liz Horman, a PBOT Transportation Demand Management Specialist. We'll hear from Ingrid Fish, who you should know already. You've heard from her before. She's on the POEM strategy team, and she's the emerging mobility policy lead at BPS. And we'll hear from April Bertelson, our transit coordinator at PBOT. And I won't go into much more. I'll let them each introduce themselves. But I think without further ado, I will hand it over to Liz.
Great, thank you, Shoshana, and thank you all for having me here today. I'm Liz Horman, and I work in the active transportation and safety section at PBOT. And as my title says, I do demand management, work on demand management projects. And so, over the last few years, one of these projects that we've been working on is a plan process that's been taking a strategic look at how transportation demand management strategies are most effective at advancing our mobility, equity, and climate goals, and how they can best serve the needs of members of our community. So the Way to Go plan, which is called, establishes the Bureau's vision, its definition, and its guiding principles about transportation demand management, and it sets forth 9 strategic priority areas to guide our future work related to demand management. But since we don't have a ton of time today, I'm not going to dive into all about the plan itself, but want to share some of the key highlights from the research and the outreach that we did in the plan development process, and then to share what are some of the other demand management strategies that go alongside pricing that will be key to advancing our mobility, climate, safety, and equity goals at the Bureau. Just to ground us a little bit, I know you guys have been talking about pricing and transportation and demand management, but for the Bureau, transportation demand management really is talking about that demand side, not the supply side solution, i.e. building more roads. So it's about how we manage our roads and keeping the number of car trips in check, and more broadly, that those demand side solutions are a way to develop policies, projects, and programs that are really focused on providing the people with the services, tools, and support they need to move about the city in a safe, efficient, and reliable way. And, during this process, we developed these guiding principles to offer sort of the overall decision-making framework for how we can adapt some of our current work and select future demand management strategies to ensure that we deliver the most equitable and sustainable and cost-effective programs. And so really with that kind of initial grounding, I'm going to shift to share some of the information that our project team collected over the lifetime of the project to answer what are the projects and programs and policies that are most important to advancing our goals and to help meet these principles that we've outlined. So I think you guys received the summary memo about some of our outreach that we did. So like many projects here at the Bureau, we were just getting ready to undergo some significant engagement with focus groups and conversations when COVID-19 hit last March. And so we adapted that process, and thanks to actually Michael Espinoza, who is here on this poem team. He is a super team member across a number of projects. He helped lead a number of one-on-one calls in April and May of last year, as well as later in the fall. And these calls were an opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation with representatives from a number of community-based organizations. We were able to use this time to sort of check in, see how they're doing as COVID was just getting underway at that point. And then we were able to kind of continue a conversation that we know we've been having for a while about what are the barriers that they see and the populations that they serve have for using transportation options. And so some of those barriers are listed here on the screen. Again, none of them are probably a surprise to this group. But some of the real structural barriers to using transportation options were around cost, were around personal security and safety issues from harassment. Also things like longer trips and barriers to using and accessing technology for payment and other barriers to actually using the transportation options like transit, bike share, and scooter share. And then we also had an opportunity to really kind of dive into what strategy ideas do they have that would be most impactful for their community members. And so these pink boxes are kind of a summary of some of those strategies we talked about. And they really fell into a couple of main buckets. The first was financial incentives. So everything from free transit to subsidies for bike share, subsidies for transit, as well as ways to help people own bikes, a bike coupon, bike credit. So really how people can get financial incentives for these transportation options. And then the other bucket was this information and encouragement. And I think we heard pretty strongly from most folks that information and encouragement, was great, but it wasn't going to fully address the structural barriers that their communities had to using transportation options. However, they definitely said that there are things that PBOT could do to make those programs stronger, including language access, representation, and really integrating community members in leading those events to get more people to use options like biking, walking, and taking transit. Slide. And so the other piece of research I wanted to share with you guys tonight was that we worked with Fair and Pierce, a consultant firm that conducted a literature review to offer sort of the summary of the range of vehicle miles traveled reduction potential for certain TDM strategies. So this, could have been an extensive research project that lasted for years, and so we're not able to look at every TDM strategy out there. But generally, the research that Fair and Pierce found was that the most sort of highest potential VMT reduction strategies were around pricing, things from paid parking at workplaces through congestion pricing, more generally as well. And then second, financial incentives. So these were employer subsidized transit or subsidized passes for targeted populations like older adults or youth. And then the final piece that I wanted to share from this research was that they also showed that a high VMT reduction potential was from combining programs. So like combining pricing for parking with financial incentives. So, programs like the PBOT transportation wallet and parking districts really showed a higher potential for reducing vehicle miles traveled. And so, the way to go plan did this outreach, did this research. We looked at some of our existing programs, and we really wanted to expand that demand management toolbox. So these 9 strategic priority areas, really are looking to address that sort of multifaceted nature of human travel behavior, and looking how we can, reduce demand or redistribute demand in space, in time, or by mode, and really looking to how we can kind of bundle current and future strategies. So while we know it will take all of strategies under all of these 9 bucket areas to be most effective to reaching our city goals and getting the outcomes we want, I did want to highlight a couple of the areas that are sort of rising to the top. And these are the ones that can be used alongside pricing to be most effective when we're looking at reducing structural barriers for Black, Indigenous, people of color, low-income Portlanders, and people with disabilities, and when we're looking at reducing vehicle miles traveled in the city. So again, the first one, which again I've already highlighted, is that financial incentives, and that financial incentives and subsidies really can change the decision-making context for people when they're making their transportation decisions, and they can help counter hidden subsidies that make driving appear easier and less expensive. And then, like I said, reduce some of those cost barriers that disproportionately impact BIPOC and people with low income. Sorry, I'm going to go to ahead. One more. And these second two strategy areas are really about ensuring that there are the conditions, that there are reliable and sufficient transportation options for people to use. So again, these are actually both highlighted in Shoshana's talk here, but direct modal services, and that we cannot expect people to drive less if there aren't sufficient options available to get people to go where they need to go. And so a variety of transportation options must be readily available for people to use to match the trip that they need to make. And so therefore increasing the number, the frequency, the reliability of transportation options like transit, like bike share, scooter share, car share, and new modes that we're not even thinking of right now is really essential for decreasing the demand of driving alone. And the second piece is this right-of-way management. So instead of building more, we need to use our limited resources more efficiently to move more people by a variety of modes in that same amount of space. So again, sample strategies, which I won't go into too much because I think Equitable will be sharing with us, is like our Rose Lane project. So how can we create that space in our existing limited right-of-way to move some of these efficient modes, move them through that space faster and more reliable. So just again, ending today, we know that it's going to be a combination of a number of these strategies and strategies within these 9 bucket areas. Some strategies are going to be more effective in certain contexts. And so I just wanted to share some of those demand management strategies that are kind of rising to the top in importance as complementary to this pricing conversation as you guys are going forward. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Liz. And I want to acknowledge, Liz, we've been spending, a year and a half talking about one of those 9 bucket areas while Liz is trying to wrangle a conversation about all of them. So we really appreciate the work that Liz is doing and kind of being here to contextualize this in that bigger frame. Liz, I did want to flag just 2 questions that came in from the chat. One was, what types of pricing did Fair and Peers look at? And the second was if right-of-way management includes curb management as well.
Yeah, so the pricing strategies that Fair and Peers looked at were parking pricing, so really actually daily paid parking at workplaces, as well as some parking pricing. There was limited research with some parking pricing for like area-based parking permits. And then they also looked at some of the congestion, so the area pricing congestion zones that we see over in Europe. So those were the pricing strategies that they used. And yes, for right-of-way management, we definitely see some of that kind of curb zone management. So it's really instead of building additional right-of-way, it's taking that same right-of-way that we have and how are we allocating or reallocating that space. So curb management would fall under there, as well as it can fall under pricing it differently.
Great, thank you, Liz. I will maybe take one more question if there is one, but then I'm going to try to keep the ship moving so we stay on schedule. But any other questions for Liz? If anyone wants to raise their hand? And Liz, I'm sorry about my slow slide advancement, trying to set up breakout groups while it's all the things. I'm not seeing any more comments or hands popping up. So thanks, Liz. We'll take that then into our next kind of presentation, not kind of presentation, definitely presentation. Next topic, where Ingrid's going to be talking to us about electric vehicles, equity, and pricing. So over to you, Ingrid.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. So I think most of you know me. Like Shoshana said, I'm on the home strategy and planning team, and I work at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability doing emerging mobility policy. So really looking at the future of the transportation system through an equity and climate lens, and focusing on how to decarbonize the transportation sector from the BPS, or Bureau of Planning and Sustainability perspective. So we've had many great discussions here that I've been really lucky to be privy to about our equitable mobility framework and pricing for outcomes. We've talked a lot about pricing to reduce congestion and a lot about VMT reduction, which is a piece of climate, but there are other ways to also reduce our carbon emissions. So I'd like to take some time to discuss how pricing can reduce emissions to address climate change and improve air quality. Next slide. So this is just really quickly what I plan to cover, a little bit about context about our city carbon goals, a little bit about health impacts, EVs and equity, kind of digging into EVs and giving some more context there, and then some low carbon fuels and pricing. So I'm actually going to be speaking pretty fast because I have a lot to cover. I kind of squashed a lot of information in here. Okay, so experts agree that we need to limit global temperature rises to 1.5 degrees to avoid irreversible, devastating impacts. The Portland City Council, via our climate emergency declaration in 2020, committed to cut carbon emissions in half by 2030 and 100% by 2050 or sooner, which would get us to net zero emissions. The last inventory report showed that we've cut our overall community-wide emissions by 19%, which is this little gray box here on the chart. But you can also see on this chart that if we assume the same level of effort and resources towards addressing climate actions, our current trends show that we actually will not meet City Council's climate reduction goals. Next slide. Just a little bit of context about carbon emissions with regards to the transportation sector. Transportation sector contributes 43% of our Multnomah County carbon emissions. And in 2015, the transportation sector emissions were only 37% of our total emissions, and their share has increased to 43% today. We've just been more successful reducing emissions in other sectors through investments in energy efficiency and renewable electricity. Next slide. So this is just showing a little bit about our strategy for decarbonizing the transportation sector here at the city. It's a three-pronged strategy. We're focusing for the purpose of this presentation on the second prong, which is using cleaner energy. But that's in addition to number 3 on this chart, which is really designing neighborhoods in a way that reduces the need to drive in the first place. And then number 1 is a piece that we've talked a lot about at this group, which is creating policies and programs that incentivize people to get out of their cars. So we know that even if we do our job right, and we have a state-of-the-art transportation system, and we're doing an amazing job on getting as many people out of cars as possible and into active transportation and shared vehicle modes, that there will always be vehicles that remain on our streets. Our strategy is really to electrify all the vehicles that remain on the street at the same time as we work on the other 2 prongs. It's also important just to keep in mind that EVs are only as clean as the energy used to propel these vehicles. And right now, given our current electricity mix in the Pacific Northwest and in Portland, they're not actually truly zero emission vehicles. And they won't be until our electricity sources are 100% renewable. But due to state regulations and utility commitments, EV emissions are getting cleaner every day. So the more you drive these things, the cleaner they're getting. And we are on the way to having 100% renewable electricity here in Portland. So that's good. Next slide. This is just just a little bit of information from Seattle and how they're looking at this. So Seattle has estimated that nearly 60% of the greenhouse gas emission reductions that they're seeking to achieve by 2030 will be through electrification. So they are also looking at these other pieces, TDM, investments in transit operations, freight, but a big chunk of it is really on transitioning from gas vehicles to electrification. And Portland staff are currently calculating what this might look like here. Next slide. This is a map of nitrogen dioxide or NO2 concentrations across Portland. Transportation is a major source of NO2, and it's really just kind of showing that, nitrogen dioxide can cause inflammation to the lungs, chest pain, coughing, reduce immunity to lung infections. It can lead to exacerbating chronic respiratory and cardiovascular impacts. And what we're really seeing is that the NO2 exposure concentrations are the highest near freeways and major roadway corridors. And that is often where vulnerable communities are more likely to live, work, and play. New research has actually shown that air pollution is one of the leading causes of death worldwide, contributing to 5 million deaths per year, far surpassing smoking, malaria, or war-related deaths. And low-income and BIPOC communities are disproportionately exposed to poor air quality, mostly because they're more likely to live in lower-income housing that's often located near freeways, rail yards, and busy corridors. There's also a COVID link to this. Air pollution contributes to greater vulnerability for a lot of health conditions, and COVID is an example. So those that suffer from chronic respiratory disease and asthma are at much higher risk of getting really, really sick from COVID. Next slide. So EVs are a tool for reducing air pollution and addressing climate change, but I'd also like to talk about why cars are still necessary for equitable access in Portland, even as we work hard to get the people who have realistic alternative options out of their vehicles. So due to geographic inequalities in Portland, we know that those who live in higher income neighborhoods tend to have more access to safe walking, biking, and frequent transit, whereas those who live in lower income neighborhoods tend to have less access to those things. So as we strive to reduce VMT, we know that that transition is not going to be equally distributed because of those geographic inequities and other factors, such as getting from north to South Portland. It's really, our transit system is really set up to go through downtown, which can be somewhat inefficient. Another is people who need to take multiple bus lines to get to services is often a barrier. Those people who have kids who might need to make multiple stops at school or daycare before going to work make it more difficult to walk, bike, and take public transit. And then there's also people who have families who have kids or adults with special needs or physical disabilities and often need to drive to be able to get the services that they need. And as we've discussed in our equitable mobility framework, safety is an issue that BIPOC communities face in a way that's distinctly different from our white counterparts. There are real safety concerns as illustrated in the Walking While Black report, the max stabbing, which happened a few years ago, and I can personally attest to being threatened on our family cargo bike. And I'm not saying that we, as in people of color, do not face racially linked car-related safety risks, because we do, but some people are going to feel safer driving. Next slide. So the idea that, just talking a little bit about EVs, many people think that all EVs are Teslas, that idea, that EVs are only for the rich, and it's actually no longer true. Currently, there are about 300 models of EVs available that range from sedans, SUVs, trucks, buses, motorcycles, scooters, and bikes. And the cost of these vehicles also have a very widespread range. The used EV market is expanding every day, and there are federal and state rebates and tax credits that can be applied to both used and new EVs. Currently, a used electric sedan can be bought for between $5,000 to $10,000, and coupling that with the state's EV rebate, which is earmarked for low and moderate income levels, the cost can get down to $2,500. More specifically, a 2015 Nissan Leaf with 50,000 miles can be bought for $7,000. Applying the currently available state rebate of $2,500 reduces it to about $4,500. So these vehicles can become even more affordable when they're shared. Examples include electric buses, Hacienda CDC's EV car share program, sharing EVs among neighbors, and affordable housing development residents. And then electric micromobility options can make longer distance trips more realistic on bikes and scooters, which can be purchased for even less money than cars and help us reach our congestion reduction goals. In terms of reduced household costs, transportation is the second largest spending category for the typical US family. Consumer Reports found that the typical total ownership savings over the life of most EVs range from $6,000 to $10,000. So low-income people and communities of color can benefit the most from these fuel and maintenance cost savings that are associated with EVs. Next slide, please. So here are some examples of emission-based pricing systems from around the world. These may or may not be right for Portland, but they serve as good reference points when thinking about designing a pricing system here. A low emission zone is an area where access for the most polluting vehicles is regulated either by a total ban or by a fee. In Europe, there are now 260 low emission zones in operation in different cities. And some examples are London has an ultra low emission zone where vehicles that do not meet the low emission standards have to pay an extra fee to access its city center. And the way they're doing it is that there's an extra $16 fee for vehicles with models that are vehicle models that are older than 2006. And that's in addition to the $31 congestion fee to enter the cordon. This policy is estimated to have reduced carbon emissions by almost half. Norway, where EVs make up about 54% of the market share in 2020, also has a congestion pricing system that's based on time of day and the weight of a vehicle. So heavier vehicles pay more. Cars and trucks propelled by electricity and hydrogen were originally exempted, but now that the market share has increased, they're just paying less of a fee than gas vehicles. They do in Norway exempt emergency vehicles and vehicles transporting disabled persons. And then another pilot project I wanted to highlight in the US is in Santa Monica. They are working on a 1 square mile in the downtown corridor of Santa Monica, in which all goods will be transported by zero emission vehicles. The goal is to eliminate diesel powered delivery vehicles and mitigate air pollution. And leaders are really hoping to use the learnings from that pilot to expand zero emission vehicle zones to other LA regions. Parking exemptions and discounts are also being used in the US and around the world to send price signals to encourage low carbon fuels. I'm not going to get into those, and I'm not really advocating for exempting EVs. We definitely want walking, biking, and transit to be more attractive than driving, but I do think we should consider discounting low carbon vehicles and phasing out that discount once they've reached a certain level of mainstream adoption. Next slide. So how do we design a pricing system so that those who benefit from the system at great cost to others can afford to change and who can afford to change their behavior are incentivized to do so? And one idea is to start with price signals that target the big polluters and the high mileage vehicles. This could be a good way to get immediate air pollution and carbon emission reduction outcomes. So price signals can be in the form of carrots or sticks, such as grants to transition the vehicle power source, discounts, or fees. Electrifying a ride-hail car could eliminate about 3 times more emissions than electrifying a personal car, according to recent research at UC Davis. And on a national level, heavy-duty vehicles represent only 9% of the vehicle miles traveled, but produce nearly 50% of the NOx and particulate matter 10 from transportation. So these high mileage and big polluters also tend to be the vehicles that cause safety and congestion issues. Focusing on these players would make a huge impact on health. So some examples of high mileage, big polluting vehicles are freight, delivery vehicles, ride hailing vehicles, car share, transit. There could be a real opportunity here to incentivize companies to decarbonize high mileage vehicles that significantly contribute to poor air quality and congestion. And this is my last slide here, the next one. Just want to kind of have people keep in mind that the vehicles that we purchase now are going to be here for decades. We need to be building the foundation now for the future. Currently, fewer than 1% of the vehicles nationwide are electric. Slow fleet turnover is a major challenge to improving air quality and mitigating future climate impacts like heat waves and wildfire and flooding events. Older cars can stick around for a decade or two on our roads. And even when all of our new cars that are sold are electric, the majority of vehicles on the road will still be running on gasoline. And it's impossible really to scale an entire market at once. So the next 3 to 5 years are key enabling years. So as climate change continues to evolve, it will make years like 2020 seem more and more normal. We're going to face huge obstacles, similar to COVID, similar to the wildfire episodes, and similar to our racial justice crises that we have experienced this past year. Scientists are telling us that we'll have more extreme events as a result of climate change. And it's really going to take bold action and foundational systemic change to reset the world so that we have systems in place that support a regenerative and renewable future where walking, biking, and vehicles powered by renewable sources are ubiquitous. It's been really great to be a part of this group's powerful discussions about whether or not it makes sense to use pricing as a tool to help us get there. Thanks so much for the opportunity to present.
Thank you so much, Ingrid. And similar to what I said about, Liz and the work that Liz takes on and the small slice kind of this project represents. I mean, we could easily do an 18-month task force on electrification. So I just so appreciate Ingrid, distilling a lot of really powerful and interesting and thought-provoking information into those slides. And it's never enough time. I want to give everyone a chance to kind of do a bit of a stretch and, stand up if you need to. And also, if there's one question for Ingrid, I can take it verbally. We're trying to catch up a little bit on time, or feel free to utilize the chat. And I might ask if Ingrid can maybe keep an eye on that chat if some questions come in, but do want to give everyone a little stretch break. And I've lost again my participants tab, so I'm not seeing if any hands are jumping up. I don't see any. So with that, if everyone's feeling a little stretched, ready to keep going, we've got one more great guest presenter tonight on a topic that I think has come up in every single conversation we've had as a task force, and that's transit. So I'm going to turn it over to April Bertelson, our transit coordinator. April, over to you.
Thank you very much. And so I'm going to talk some about ways to improve transit and including the Rose Lane project. Next slide. And want to start by grounding that, the importance of transit to the city of Portland. And I think that the fact that you've talked about it at every one of your meetings, as well as every one of the presenters has talked about it today, that all the more demonstrates a recognition of that importance. And I just would add that Portland's past and future are deeply rooted in transit. It's part of our framework for how the city was built and continues to focus our future growth as a part of the transit as a backbone. And that PBOT recognizes that transit is a critical importance to meeting our mobility, climate, and equity goals. And so we do many ways in which we are trying to advance that. And I would want to highlight part of it, listening to hear from others what's important to them. And I'll go to the next slide. And so I want to reflect back what we've heard from community representatives, some of you in fact, about what's important for improving transit. On to the next slide. So organized in sort of two categories, the capital investment side, ways to improve transit, starting with faster and more reliable transit. Again and again, we hear that often, particularly the bus or your transit trips, take too long or is not reliable. So what can we do to prioritize buses so they're not stuck in traffic, and address some of those issues of people needing to live further away from their work or other destinations and tied up in affordability crisis. So what can we do to shorten that trip or to make it possible to reach more places in the same amount of time? Additionally, we hear about the need for safer streets that are served by transit. 82nd Avenue certainly comes to mind every time I say this, but there are many others too. Better bus stops and access to them. So that's everything that everyone, accessible to everyone, and meeting ADA, to personal security concerns, including some which were mentioned earlier, and comfort, shelters, somewhere to sit, and the ped bike access to those stops and coordinating that. Additionally, greener buses. Just as Ingrid had also mentioned, hearing the importance of quitting diesel and transitioning fleets to for buses, garages, and facilities, all that it takes to support that transition. I would highlight here that the city does operate some transit, and ours is green, so or is already electric, so a streetcar for the primary example of that. But a lot is going to be taken to transition buses. On to the next slide. In addition to that, we often hear about importance of more transit service and things on the subsidy and operations side. So organized these here. So often hearing about the need for more bus frequency on the current routes, a wider span of service, early in the morning, in the evenings, weekends, and 24-hour service, important for some. And I would tie that's also supports Vision Zero goals, as well as equity. And then in addition, expanding the bus system. So adding new routes where more places that are not currently served by transit, and shuttle service where bus service is not practical, or at least not in the near term. So all sort of service increases, if you will, that we are here is important, along with affordable transit. So we hear about Youth Pass and other increased fare subsidies. And I would highlight on this note that TriMet has shared that they are launching a fareless and fare subsidy study to understand and start to identify what would be prioritized for funding if more funding was available. I would encourage you, if you're interested in that topic, to engage in that and learn more about that study. The Transit Equity and Advisory Committee that advises TriMet will be tracking this, and I can get you more contact if you need. And we also hear about the need for reforming public safety, security, and policing, including TriMet's reimagining these things and beyond. And so just want to sort of that organizing that there's these two categories, some of which, all of which need more funding if we are to realize them. And beyond, to fully realize them beyond the existing resources we have. One effort, though, that we are pursuing is the Rose Lane project, and I would go ahead and hop to the next one. So while TriMet operates most of the buses and the transit system in the region, we still recognize that we're an important partner in the success of transit as stewards of the right-of-way. And that we play a role in helping transit to serve people of the city better. And that includes in part a faster and reliable ride. And so the Rose Lane project is our effort. Next slide. oops, oh, I think we may have, sorry, previous slide. There we go. Yes. So this is our network vision for primary transit, primary Rose Lane transit lines, and an vision of a network of bus and streetcars that will be faster and more reliable. And this really grew out of the city's enhanced transit corridors plan and was advanced under the leadership of former Commissioner Hugh Daly to more boldly expedite that plan with a sense of urgency to address climate and racial equity. So we are continuing on that effort. Next slide. So what are Rose Lanes? Just to clarify, they are the transit routes that roughly dozen plus of bus and streetcar lines. So those routes are where we are focused on identifying how to get buses and streetcar, get them priority where they need it, where the road is congested, and improve those lines for the people riding them, including if you're transferring to and from them. And then we have over 20 tools of transit priority and improvements that we can pull from to adjust the context. And that's just to highlight that Rose Lane does not mean that it's necessarily a bus lane or that's even a red bus lane, but that those are some of the tools that we deploy to improve the Rose Lane transit routes. And we can, carry on. So a lot of what we're looking to do with the Rose Lane project is guided by our Better Off measures, which really put people first, particularly people of color and our BIPOC community. We developed these with input from Transportation Justice Partners advising Commissioner Hugh Daly and trying to take a results-based accountability approach to racial equity. And so we're aiming to reduce disparities between Black, Indigenous, and people of color and those with white people, while doing so, improving outcomes for all. And so these help to guide and leading with reducing disparities in commute time. I will go ahead to the next. Along the way, we are taking into consideration other modes, both to see where we may be able to benefit those modes, as well as to mitigate for potential impacts or understand the trade-offs that may come along with that. And particularly with concern for more vulnerable users walking and biking. We'll go ahead to the next slide. I just would want to reinforce that even the pandemic has had quite an impact on transit and those who ride it or depend upon it. But that we still see this as important. The Rose Lane project itself during the pandemic and into the future, we know that people have still continued to ride and rely on transit, and including essential workers, frontline workers, and people who rely it to get on their daily needs, and that we see it as a part of our recovery as well, as traffic patterns and people's travels evolve and return. It'll be a part of our future. We'll go to the next slide. A bit of a status update on Rose Lanes. As of December, we have 16 projects that are completed that were originally identified in the report adopted by Council, 18 that are funded and in progress, and 25 proposed projects, many we rolled out in December at a conceptual level, and we'll continue to evaluate these and identify which ones that we can advance with funding or more funding as it becomes available. So currently the projects that we have exceed the funding that we, or the projects we have identified exceed the funding that we have at this time. So we are definitely interested in ways to fund more. But we're still making them happen as we go. This is map of our, it's a picture of our interactive map online. I encourage you to go look at it, where you can see the projects in their different status. And this is again as of December and where those projects are. go on to the next slide. And coming next on the Rose Lane front, we are going to be publishing a public involvement summary report from what we heard during our our winter engagement from December through January, and providing update on which projects would advance next. And continue to update the interactive map. So it's still as it was in December, but we will be updating with updates of project status. And then there will be additional public involvement as in the project areas or corridors where the individual projects advance. So we've done some program level of engagement, and now this is moving into individual corridors. To learn more or to sign up, visit our website. Oh, yeah, no worries. And that'll be at the end too. I'll put it in the chat. I think it's actually on the website for POEM as well. Sorry to end on maybe a challenging note, a sad note, but I think it's important to acknowledge that our funding opportunities have diminished in 2020, and we face real challenges in how to make all the things happen that have been identified as priorities with less funding. And the regional investment measure was a particularly setback along with the pandemic. A number of the things that I talked about in the beginning could have been advanced with funding from the regional investment measure. And I believe Getting There Coalition, Getting There Together Coalition, and others who helped inform this had identified some things that are important that we still need to look at how to find a way to do. And so I just highlight some of these on this slide here, some of the efforts that would have been funded with the regional investment measure that are now not, and as well as acknowledging that other state revenue, city revenue, and TriMet revenues have gone down or are still recovering. And so while we have big dreams for things and recognize the importance of transit, we are going to need to identify more resources on how to make them happen. And so with that, I look forward to hearing your deliberations and how we can support transit. And there you go, there's a website to learn more about the Rose Lanes.
Thank you so much, April.
Welcome.
And thanks all for, that was, I don't know about you, that was like drinking from a really interesting but big fire hose. I see Bao's question in the chat about criteria for selecting and prioritizing Rose Lane projects. I'm going to kind of quickly answer that with, those better off measures that April showed. Those are really kind of being used along with some other criteria. I'm going to have April maybe take a stab at answering maybe in more detail in a written form because we are a little behind schedule, and I'm going to try to catch us up. But if that's okay, I'm sorry guys, I'm sorry to cut the Q&A short, but the good news is we know where all these people, we don't know where they live, but we know where they work, we know how to reach them, we know how to connect you with them if you have specific questions, and we encourage you to kind of get those questions out in your small groups. But I'm going to move us into our discussions, and kind of to set the scene, I want to, say, if that felt overwhelming, if that felt like a lot of information coming at you at just about 3 major topics, that's, I think, how a lot of policymakers and decision makers around the world who are kind of faced with a potential pricing policy that might generate revenue, that might be how they feel, okay, so I've got a lot of priorities, a lot of needs, a lot of things that are really important to invest in our mobility system and make it more equitable. How do I prioritize? How do I kind of determine what might be the best complement to a pricing policy? And there's no real right or wrong answer there. It's about values, it's about trade-offs, it's about outcomes. And we kind of want to put you a little bit in that seat, that policymaker, decision maker, considerer position tonight. And so what we're going to do is break into groups, and we're going to do a mock reinvestment exercise. So we're going to give you a frustratingly little amount of information. We're going to say you have adopted a pricing policy. We're not going to define what it is. We've adopted a pricing policy. It's generated some revenue. You're going to get a few, fake dollar bills. I'll show you what it looks like. And we're going to ask you to prioritize or to start kind of thinking about how you might reinvest that revenue from pricing. Now, I want to say everything you're going to see in terms of a reinvestment bucket is critically important. It's all things that PBOT cares about and the city cares about and that we want to and need to invest in. But your pricing policy only has generated so much revenue. So you're going to have to make a few trade-offs and really think about what you want to prioritize and why. So once we've done the mock reinvestment, you're going to have some time to talk in your groups about, what was really hard or frustrating or difficult about that, but what criteria you use to make decisions in your reinvestment, and also was anything missing? We'll have a category on there for something else, because I'm sure we have not covered it all, and there may be great ideas lurking out there. And really, I just kind of want to leave you with this prompt of, let's be transformative here. I think April ended on a dark note, but a very important note about we face some real challenges. There's a lot of things we could do and want to do, and they also kind of require some big dreaming and not being scared of that vision of what could be in the future. So I really want you guys in your small groups to be thinking about what might be the most transformative package potentially of a pricing policy and a complementary strategy. And that's what we'll report back on when we get back into our groups. So let me do a little bit of tech wizardry here. We are going to be using a tool tonight called Jamboard, which you might have used in the past. Oh boy, now I got to figure out how I share my Jamboard. 1 second. Jamboard is a pretty easy kind of sticky wall online. So you should all be able to get in and start jamming. Let me get the link for you. And so when you get into your groups, you're going to navigate to find your name on a Jamboard. A quick note to my staff, we had a few task force members that are not here tonight. So Michael and I have collapsed our groups. So ignore the 4th Jamboard, there are only 3. And at the top of the Jamboard, and I'm gonna actually show you my.
Emma, I think we just lost your audio for a minute.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah.
Okay. Zoom. Second, I'm going to share my screen again. Okay. Can you see this Jamboard here? Seeing nods? Okay. So when you get in there, I'll paste the link in a second, or maybe one of my colleagues could paste that link from the instructions for me into the chat. You're going to use this thing up here. That lets you navigate between the different frames. So frame 1 is Shoshana's group, and you'll see names here. Frame 2 is Eric's group, and frame 3 is Emma and Michael's group, and I'll delete the frame 4. And so you'll find your name, and you've got some dollar bills that have been generated by your pricing policy. And we've broken them into a few different denominations. You've got kind of a high value bill with $3 signs, a couple with $2 signs, and a couple with $1 sign. And the reason we gave you those different kinds of bills is because not all of the stuff you see here costs the same amount of money. Some of it's more expensive, some of it's less expensive. So you're gonna have just a few minutes to point to your sticky. You can just click on it and drag and just put it near where you think that should be invested. Oops. And sometimes you'll move other things like the label and we'll move that back. We're gonna give this a shot. So you should all be able to edit it when you get in there. People are already going to town on the stickies. This is great. Bao, I think, is jumping ahead. Bao, who knew you liked transit, Bao? So I'm gonna get you guys into your group so we can start going. And I will see you all back here. Let me look at the clock. Okay, facilitators, I'm gonna pull you back at 7:35. That is your target. We're gonna try to catch up a little bit on time. Any burning questions before we go? Oh, I have one burning question. Who is 503-449-7087? I want to put you with your person, or are you just a call in? And if I don't hear anything, I'm just going to put you into Shoshana's group, and I hope you do go with your self. Okay, folks, I'm going to open all the rooms. Have fun. See you in a bit. And Ingrid, if you're still there. Okay. Hi, Catherine. We are in breakout groups. Can I put you in one?
I was in Shoshana's. I was on my phone, but I
Ah,
computer, and I would be happy to be in that.
okay, I'll put you back there. Thanks.
Thanks.
So I think I've sent you yeah, there we go. sorry, started my group, I was like, okay, I'm gonna close all the rooms, and then I just left and I didn't actually close it. So you probably don't.
We were confused.
We were very confused. We are the same group. Time travel.
Well, Ingrid's here, so I think the other groups should be closing. They were all talking up to the wire like we were.
It was going to give a minute to close them, so they might do.
Okay. Ingrid, are you getting some outside time? Finally. Okay.
Sharifa, were you gonna say something? You're muted right now.
Oh, Sharifa, you're still muted. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. I came all prepared to talk about that thing you guys sent us in the email about that the report from that was in a draft, you know, that had all the distance from downtown and the less than 2 mile trips and things like that.
Yeah.
Probably from the way to go plan stuff.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I thought, I don't know. I thought I was hoping to discuss that a little bit, but maybe it's too late now.
No, I mean, I hear you. I think we crammed too much into this meeting. I will own that. Definitely have had a lot more time for discussion. Let's debrief on what we just talked about, and then we have a few more things to get through at the end, but I do want to make sure that we if folks do have kind of thoughts or questions or comments on those materials or the presentations, that we can create some space for that. But I'm going to do kind of quick rapid fire round robin, how it went in each of the groups. Shoshana, can I start with you for your group's report out?
Sure. We had really great discussion. Thanks to everyone in our group. And I think we had a few things that popped out pretty clearly. Everyone in our group talked a lot about the importance actually of investing in affordable housing and how critical that is. Affordable housing, transit, both infrastructure and service and operations, as well as walking and biking infrastructure were the 3 of the 8 categories that popped the most in our group. And sort of going back again to affordable housing, you know, really thoughtful, important sort of comments from Esme about just how critical solving some of our housing problems are, and making those connections between transportation and housing. And when we talked a little bit about what are some transformational ideas, like that was you know, be bold, do some bold pricing strategies, but also tackle more of the housing issues as well at the same time. So that was, I think, clearly the sort of transformational push and discussion that came out of our group. And then we also talked a little bit at the end about how important it is to really help people really with more of the behavior change and you know, just sort of changing norms and helping people understand using different modes. A number of people grew up other places or are from other places or spent some time other places. And, you know, when you live in a big city and everyone rides transit, then it, you know, it's just easier. Whereas here, a lot of people don't have that same experience. And so how important some of the other things, which I think we had trip discounts and financial incentives. We didn't really have some of the like programming work on here, but just how important some of the, whether it's incentives for the first few times or whether it's, you know, just helping shift norms for people is also really important. But I think those are the main things we covered. Anyone else in our group have anything really quickly? Oh, there's
I just wanted to say, like, the big point I wanted to make about housing is it's about narrative and how we frame these policies going forward. And that I think for this to be successful, we have to engage with the history of gentrification and displacement and talk about transportation pricing in relation to that as a way of restoring the possibility of a more just city. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Esme and Shoshana. Yeah, if everyone is okay with it, although your beautiful faces are also lovely to look at, I wanted to put up our board so you can see, because there were some different priorities in different groups. So I'm going to move it over to group 2, which was Eric's group, and ask Eric to give a quick rundown of what you talked about.
Thanks. So as you can see here, there was some strong focus on transit infrastructure and operations, even if we did acknowledge the constitutional restriction on one of them. But I think it was part of a broader theme that was sounded that you also see with the biking and walking infrastructure and the existing infrastructure, which is, if we're putting prices in here, that's intended to change behavior. And so we need to make sure that there are those options that exist for folks to be able to make different choices, particularly in this region, because what we want to be less focused on is where the diversion from all the car trips, because of course people will stay in their cars when we price, is going to, instead it's where are the impacts of these prices maybe going to be felt, and what does that then mean for the completeness and utility of our multimodal networks and systems, and how do we make sure that those are adequate, particularly from an equity perspective, knowing historic underinvestment and some of the displacement and gentrification that Esme just noted as well. And so you also see in affordable housing and transit-oriented development a fair amount of support, the concept of complete communities and making sure folks can get to their needs without having to travel as widely also came out, even as we recognized not all Todd projects have been equally successful in helping support some of that, but I think still interest in doing so. So I think that was sort of the array there. I think what we also recognize that the transformative pieces was interesting. Some of the conversation was recognizing sort of some of the tensions and the headwinds, maybe is a term I'll use, that we face in some of the other policy contexts, federally especially, and others. And so how do we sort of, part of the transformative is to have better alignment with pricing and price signals throughout, so that we're investing holistically in multimodal infrastructure, that we're charging users pretty consistently, but not necessarily only rewarding folks that drive to build more driving infrastructure. So that's sort of recognizing that part of what we can do is limited by what others have authority over and or the incentives and systems that they're putting in there. So how do we think across those levels, I think, was one big transformative idea. And then I think really how do we continue to understand where the geographic impacts are and where we need to prioritize investment relative to giving people viable options there. Anything else from our group to note, knowing we're moving quickly?
Okay. We'll move then to mine and Michael's group. Michael, do you want to do the report out for us? I'm happy to do it, but people are probably sick of my voice.
Yeah, I'm happy to share. Then you or anyone else, feel free to jump in there. We had a lot of good conversation, and by far transit service operations that was like our really strongest area where folks wanted to see reinvestment go. We acknowledged that a lot of them are really interrelated, and I guess part of what I am, gosh, there was so much that happened in there. We really dove into in the trip discounts and financial incentives, we had a lot of interest in that, and we had some questions and wanted some nuance towards what does that mean exactly. And we talked about what would it be like to just give people money and have a direct cash option for folks. And there was a lot of support for yes, because to advance our equity goals and to just give people that power or that spending power to have that money to put where they need. So maybe it is something transportation, or maybe it's daycare. There was a lot of there was an acknowledgement of there's a trust within our group that that person would be able to make the best decision on where that kind of funding could go. We also had really great comments too on when we're looking at the future of our roads, there's questions around will our roadways remain free as they currently are, and what does that mean for repercussions in that system, but also considering if we see that pricing is something that will happen. And, tolling was referenced as ODOT is on a path to tolling. And so like, how can we shape that mechanism to be as equitable as possible? So that's my like quick summary, but there is a lot of other things. Emma, do you have other things
that was a good summary, and I feel bad. I think I was throwing in questions that made it meander, but you did a really nice job summarizing the meander. I think, one other thing I might flag is, unlike the first group, we had nothing on affordable housing and had a few comments about, affordable housing is absolutely critical, but is pricing the right revenue source to generate, enough revenue to make a meaningful impact there was, I think, one of the reasons that has no investment on our board. And then finally, we had a good talk about the complement of the pricing policy to the reinvestment tool. So, we were laughing that this was kind of magic money that just emerged out of nowhere. But if the magic money had come from a TNC fee, maybe that should go more to electrification for TNCs, or if it came from parking, maybe it's more suited for something else. But then just to reiterate what Michael said, I think that kind of transformative idea of direct cash rebates or direct cash into the pockets of low income folks was really something that resonated with several folks in our group. Anything else, group 3, you want to chime in and mention? All right. And I'm going to acknowledge that, this was not adequate time to both discuss the presentations, the background material, and the exercise. I really appreciate the rich discussion. It's just like, maybe you need a 36-month process, but in all seriousness, we really welcome, any comments that you want to share or anything you want to like follow up with our experts on to discuss more. What I'm going to do to close us out for our last 10 minutes is talk a little bit about what we're going to ask of you between the next 2 meetings. And I think there'll be an opportunity in that homework to also really be reflecting on everything we've discussed tonight and everything that was kind of shared prior to the meeting. So I'm just getting my slides back in order. So, as Shoshana said at the very beginning, we are really on the road to final votes and to the final recommendations of our task force. I found this meme the other day. It made me smile because it's how I feel about where we are in our process. We're so close. Not that I want to stop seeing you every month, but I'm sure you'll also enjoy having your Monday evenings back. But we also, only have 2-minute meetings left to do, I think, a lot of work to bring things together. And so because of that, because we want to preserve literally beginning to end of next meeting for no more information out, this is all going to be about you guys discussing and deliberating. We didn't want to sit here and talk at you with the recommendations. We have been doing an exercise of going back through every meeting, every summary, every discussion note, and trying to pull out what we think we've heard from this multifaceted and multi-opinionated group. We are nearly able to share that kind of list of draft recommendations with you. It says tonight on there. We were hoping to get it out tonight. It's probably going to be sometime this week that we distribute the draft recommendations, but we're going to do that as soon as possible. So that will come your way via email in a homework packet. I'll explain that in a second. And what we're asking is that by June 1st, you do some homework, you review the recommendations, and you send us your comments and your feedback. And kind of like we did with the tolling letter, the plan there is to collate the feedback, to do some kind of track change editing prior to the meeting so that we're not spending our time on the wordsmithing, we're spending our time on that real deliberation, that real like, oh, but this piece isn't coming out strongly. Oh, I really wanted to say this, I never got the chance, and just real discussion for our whole time in June. Our plan is then after that June meeting, we'll take all that feedback, we'll do one last round of revisions, and in July, we are going to vote on the recommendations. As a reminder, this is not a consensus required task force. It'll be majority votes get included as a recommendation, but we'll record all minority opinions. And we're going to build in a little bit of time to celebrate because you all deserve it. You've been working really, really hard, and when we deserve to have a little bit of fun in the summer. So as I said, we're going to send out the homework packet and some optional exercises via email shortly. And we hope that those exercises help you not just read a document and provide some track changes, but really think about the implications of some of these recommendations. We're going to send a comment form with the recommendations so that if you prefer to kind of provide feedback that way, more narrative, you can do that. But you can also just get in there and use track changes if that's the way you like to work. And we're going to ask that you email us your feedback by that June 1st deadline. And this will all come out again via email as a kind of recap later this week. So what you'll see in the recommendations is you'll see, some recommendations in each of these categories that we've been talking about now for several months. You're going to see those principles, those overarching statements and values that we've heard from you that would need to apply regardless of the pricing policy. We've collated what we've heard from you as things that the city should do next, those nearer term pricing moves that they should advance as quickly as possible. The recommendations around that kind of longer term vision, the longer term opportunities that in the direction we want to head. Tonight's information, we probably won't have fully processed it all and thrown it in. So that might be still a space where we really would welcome your feedback, your reflections on this discussion and what you think should really land in that section. And then a few recommendations on potential next steps and implementation considerations as well. Things we've heard from you about kind of the process that should occur after POEM concludes. So 2 quick things in that homework packet, and this is really trying to set the stage for what we want to do in June. We know that we've been talking about the system level impacts of pricing throughout our whole process. What's going to happen to VMT? What's going to happen to GHG? But we also, a theme that you all have really brought into every discussion is the human impact of pricing, the individual household and individual business impact of this. So I'm not going to read this to you. This will be in your homework packet, but we've created these 5 hypothetical households or hypothetical one hypothetical business. And these are not meant to be wholly representative, not meant to be any kind of, this is Portland, but just to try to get you to be, as you're reading the recommendations, thinking from that human level. What would that mean for this family? What would that mean for that business? And in June, we also want to use this lens, this human lens, to really guide and anchor our conversation. So you'll see that coming to you in your homework packet. And then the second thing you're going to see, if you're maybe less of a metaphorical thinker and more of a literal, just give me the questions, ma'am, is we're going to kind of go back to our charge about, the status quo today is inequitable. How could these recommendations improve equitable mobility as it's defined in our framework that we've been using? How will it make it easier to move people and goods? How will it impact the climate crisis? How will it impact equity in our system? And really try to put your kind of policymaker hat on and see, one way I like to think of it is like, what do I want to see on the front page of the Oregonian at the end of this process? What would be that kind of banner takeaway from the 18 months that you guys have all put in? So I'm just trying to give you a flavor. This is all going to come out to you in a homework packet. But with our last remaining minutes here, I'm going to open the chat as well. Any questions about what's coming your way and what we are asking of you by June 1st? Sorry to give you homework. It's like the mean teacher who right when everyone has senioritis and it's almost summer break, she's like, oh, but wait, here's the report you got to write now. Hopefully it'll be kind of fun. We tried to make it thought-provoking, but. Okay. I guess I'm not actually looking at the participants tab to see if any hands are popping up. Not seeing any. All right. Well, I have 7:59 on the dot, so I will get you out of here on time. 2 meetings left, guys. You only got to see us 2 more times. We have invited our commissioners to attend your next meeting since it's such an important milestone in your process. So we really highly encourage, if you can attend that next one, that's going to be the meat of the matter. That's the final deliberation. That's really where things are going to get exciting. And I just want to say thank you once again. We're rounding the bend of home plate. I'm trying to use baseball metaphors, but I don't actually watch baseball. I think with that, unless Shoshana, you have any closing comments, we will probably conclude.
No, just thanks again, everyone. Really appreciate it, and have a wonderful week.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.